Maple Hill Cemetery in Huntsville is the largest and oldest cemetery in Alabama. It began as a small 2-acre cemetery in 1822 and has now grown to nearly 100 acres with over 80,000 graves. Maple Hill Cemetery has 5 Alabama governors, 5 U.S. senators, 10 U.S. representatives, and a playground. It's the playground at Maple Hill Cemetery that seems to draw the most attention. Officially named Maple Hill Park, it's the strange happenings at the playground that prompts locals to give the small park its most well-known name, Dead Children's Playground. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture. Some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. It's not a sight you see every day. At least I don't. Come to think of it, I've never seen a playground at a cemetery before. But in Huntsville, Alabama, Maple Hill Cemetery has one. The city calls it Maple Hill Park, but to locals, it's called Dead Children's Playground. There's many accounts of paranormal things there, and it's become the typical teenage hangout for those with something to prove. With the sheer size of this cemetery, it's easy to see the thought behind it. Families visiting departed loved ones or attending a funeral with kids with a never-ending supply of energy could get a wee bit stressful. For a kid with no concept of death, tombstones are just big rocks, begging to be climbed and jumped on. A connected playground is a win-win for everyone, right? Well, not so fast. According to local legend, the original playground was put in place as a memorial of sorts for the amount of children that passed away during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. Rather than a stone replica, though, it was a functioning playground. The Spanish flu raged through the world in 1918, killing an estimated 50 million people worldwide. Huntsville was hit hard by it as well. In fact, according to the Alabama Department of Public Health, Huntsville was the first city to report a case in Alabama on September 25, 1918. On October 5th, just 10 days later, the Birmingham News reported, quote, "Reported cases of Spanish influenza have increased to more than 1,100 in Huntsville. According to Dr. C.A. Grote, health officer of Madison County, there have been an additional 300 cases and 7 deaths in the past 24 hours. End quote. 2 days later, on October 7th, the governor of Alabama ordered all public places be closed. This included stores and churches. In 3 weeks, there were over 25,000 cases. By October 13th, the Birmingham News reported that only 1 pharmacist and 1 local doctor remained unaffected by the virus. Quote, "A desperate situation exists in Huntsville growing out of the Spanish influenza epidemic. All druggists, physicians, and prescription clerks, except 1, have been stricken with the disease, and a distressing appeal reached Montgomery last night by telegram for immediate help for the stricken city." End quote. Hospitals and staff were overrun, and the streets were lined with horse-drawn wagons going to the morgues, bodies stacked on top of bodies. Many patients were just treated at home, large quarantine signs nailed to their doors. In an effort to try to stop the spread, everyone was told to keep their windows closed. Parents even invented a quaint little rhyme to help warn their kids. I had a bird, its name was Enza. I opened the window, and in flew Enza. This, of course, had the opposite effect. The sickness spread throughout entire families. There is no official count as to how many children died in Huntsville, but estimates have it in the hundreds. Thus was life and death in Huntsville until February of 1919. The community tried to move on and rebuild as best it could, but a large portion of them were now gone. A memorial was placed in Maple Hill Cemetery for those lost to the pandemic of 1918, but when the playground was erected, officials simply took it upon themselves to designate it as a memorial to the children that were lost. The original playground sat separate from Maple Hill Cemetery, kind of across the street, if you will, and almost immediately there were signs that it was loved and used, even when children were not present, not the living anyway. People started to claim that they saw the swings move on their own, even when no wind was present. Others claimed to see faint figures of children appear and disappear on the playground equipment, going about and playing like normal. Orbs and children's laughter is also reported. The playground at Maple Hill Park near the cemetery took on a life of its own. The playground sits in a low spot of the grounds and is surrounded on three sides by high limestone outcroppings and trees. Many say this leads to a claustrophobic feeling. The playground seems to attract more teens and paranormal enthusiasts than living kids, but it was left in place. The locals had become attached to the site and idea of it, regardless if they actually used it or not. It was a standing symbol of the children lost in 1918, and the thought and stories of their lingering ghost having somewhere to play just seemed right. Over the years, though, the cemetery grew and grew. In 2007, city officials decided to tear down the playground to make room for the cemetery's expansion. The locals were outraged. Some took to petitioning city officials, and others took to protesting. In the end, the community won, and a new playground with updated equipment was put back in place. The residents of Huntsville were overjoyed, and too, so it seems, were the residents of Maple Hill Cemetery. The strange and unexplained events continued with the new equipment, and they say on some nights children's laughter can still be heard coming from the secluded location of the playground. Why is it that some places seem to be more haunted than others? An event of mass death from an out-of-control sickness could do it, I guess. There are more contributing factors at Maple Hill that can at least raise your eyebrows, though. The limestone. There is limestone all around the area of the playground, especially the limestone walls behind it. Before Maple Hill Cemetery expanded into the section of the playground, this area was a limestone quarry. In the 1970s, T.C. Lethbridge, an archaeologist and parapsychologist, proposed what is now known as the stone tape theory. The stone tape theory is a speculation that mental impressions from emotional or traumatic events can be projected into the form of energy and are recorded onto rock and stone, then replayed when conditions are right. The limestone cliffs behind the playground are the remains of the original quarry. It wasn't a totally new idea, though. In the 19th century, similar thoughts were already circulating. Charles Babbage was working on a theory that spoken words left permanent impressions in the air, even though they were no longer heard after time. He equated the possibility to a transfer of motion between particles. Around that same time, Edmund Gurney and Eleanor Sidgwick presented a theory about certain buildings or materials being able to store emotions of past events which could later be played back. These theories today are what most paranormal investigators refer to as residual hauntings. You have two main types, residual hauntings and intelligent hauntings. Intelligent hauntings would be where the spirit directly communicates and interacts with the living world around them, while a residual haunting would be a type of playback of past events. In a residual haunting, the spirits seem to replay past actions with no knowledge of changes of the modern world around them or the living people present. Most agree that residual hauntings would be the most common, and the theories laid out earlier would tend to support the events at what is now known as Dead Children's Playground. However, the tearing down of the original playground and construction of a new one makes me second guess that. Not to mention the playground didn't exist there in 1918, or that the victims of the Spanish flu would not have actually died in the vicinity of the limestone to potentially project their feelings or energy into the rock, as laid out by the stone tape theory. So, what would help support the stone tape theory? Well, in the 1960s, Huntsville experienced a series of missing children. One day, someone exploring the old quarry site found a small skull. The authorities were notified, and a full-blown investigation of the old quarry was soon underway. The investigation turned up several skeletal remains of children, along with some corpses of more fresh murders, showing signs of malnourishment and partly healed wounds, suggesting the children had been held somewhere for some time. No one was ever caught or charged in the crimes, but after the grisly discovery, the missing children's cases in Huntsville stopped. 20 years later, in 1985, is when the original playground was put in place. Something like that would lend to energies and emotions being imprinted into the limestone for sure. But then again, we have reports of the spirits of children playing. You'd think for a residual haunting boosted by the surrounding limestone, the paranormal activity would be more dark, sad, negative. Perhaps it's an intelligent haunting after all, and the children just choose not to interact with you. The spirits don't interact with you because, well, they're just having fun. How many times have you been in a park and seen kids playing? They don't pay you any attention. They're all caught up in life in the moment. Why would it be any different for them now? Maybe they're just having the time of their life, or the time of their afterlife.